Have you ever heard of a crime so shocking that speaking the criminal's name became illegal? In 356 BCE, under the glittering skies of Ephesus, a man named Herostratus committed an act so brazen that authorities scrambled not just to punish him, but to erase him. He didn't steal gold or march armies against the city. He burned down its greatest treasure, the Temple of Artemis, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. His motive was neither vengeance nor conquest. It was fame. He wanted to carve his name into history, no matter the cost to innocence, beauty, or faith. In the hush that followed the temple's collapse, officials faced an unprecedented dilemma. This sanctuary was more than stone and mortar. It was the beating heart of a city, a place where priests spoke directly with the divine, and pilgrims from distant lands knelt in reverent silence. To lose it was to lose a piece of the world's soul. Yet in the smoky aftermath, city leaders went beyond mere reconstruction plans. They declared that not only was the arsonist to be executed, but his name was to be forbidden. Speak it, and you risked exile, or worse. The logic was chillingly simple. If no one ever spoke Herostratus, he would fade into oblivion, the memory of his crime extinguished as surely as the fire had consumed the temple. But history has a way of sneaking past even the strictest bans. Despite the edict, Herostratus's name survived, whispered by historians and scolded by moralists for centuries. The very attempt to bury his memory only amplified the intrigue. People began to wonder, what kind of man must one be to attack the divine for the sake of personal glory? And what kind of power does a temple hold that its loss demands such draconian measures to protect its sanctity? Here lies a puzzle we'll return to again and again. Temples are more than buildings. They are thresholds, guardians of hidden rites and ancient wisdom. When those thresholds are violated, it's not just property that's destroyed. It's a bridge between the visible and the invisible. In the days after the fire, Ephesians whispered of desecrated altars, looted shrines, and the goddesses' silent weeping. They spoke of the trembling that ran through every pillar's foundation, as if the earth itself recoiled. Yet the official silence around Herostratus persisted, creating a tension that pulsed beneath every stone the city laid to rebuild. Was the ban effective, or did it simply fuel a darker fascination with the unknown, an unspoken question? If a single spark could bring down the greatest temple of its age, what else lurked in the shadows waiting for a match? We'll never fully answer why some men choose ruin over remembrance, but in that silence after the blaze, a deeper fear emerged. The fear that sacred spaces could be stripped of their power, leaving only empty shells, and perhaps a greater fear still, that the line between protector and destroyer is thinner than we imagine. So we begin our journey here, at the ruins of Artemis's temple, haunted by a name that should have vanished. What secrets did those marble halls hold? Why did a city risk everything to hide the face of its greatest betrayer? The answers lie buried beneath layers of ash and decree, waiting for the bold to dig them out. And as we step forward, be prepared to question more than just stone and fire. Ask yourself, what would you protect so fiercely that you'd ban a name? And what might that ban reveal about the power you fear most? When a pilgrim crossed the threshold of an ancient temple, they stepped into a world where the familiar rules of reality seemed to melt away. In his dialogue Phaedrus, Plato describes how initiates gathered in a hidden chamber, far from the clamor of Athens, felt their wings of the soul unfurl, as if a divine wind had lifted them free of ordinary thought. That chamber, sealed by ritual, guarded by priests, and scented with incense, was not merely a room of stone and shadow. It was a bridge to a realm where insight came as prophecy, and the seeker tasted truths no logic could reach. Long before Plato, in the great cities of the Indus Valley, temple complexes rose on raised platforms, their brick walls etched with curious spirals and lotus motifs. Archaeologists find channels once used to flood inner sanctuaries with water, turning them into pools of reflection. There devotees would sit in near darkness, listening to the gentle lapping at their feet, and attain a kind of receptive stillness. No written records survive from that age, but later Hindu texts echo the same idea. A temple's hidden sanctum serves as a womb of transformation, where the self dissolves and reforms in harmony with the cosmos. Thousands of miles away and centuries later, Maya priests erected stepped pyramids, whose stairways aligned precisely with the sun at the equinox. Those stairways were more than architectural flourishes. They were sacred ladders, each step a beat in the rhythm of the earth and heavens. At the summit, under a crisp sky, the faithful drank cacao laced with visionary plants. Their senses sharpened, their minds opened. In that altered state, they traced patterns in the stars and decoded the cycles of maize, water, and human destiny. Western scholars once dismissed these rites as mere superstition, but recent research in cognitive science suggests that such visionary experiences fostered early breakthroughs in astronomy, governance, and collective identity. Why then did so many of these gateways vanish from living memory or become cast as relics of barbarism? The answer lies in the uneasy marriage of mystery and power. When a temple's inner sanctum opened to a select few, it promised direct communion with forces beyond kings and priests. That promise undermined the monopoly of those who claimed exclusive access to truth. In 4th century Alexandria, Emperor Theodosius III outlawed the Eleusinian mysteries, secret rites in honor of Demeter and Persephone, because their oracles whispered of a resurrection beyond the emperor's decree. When the flame of initiation defied imperial edict, the flame was snuffed out by law and force. In the rugged hills of Central Asia, cave temples carved into cliffs held painted images of meditative Buddhas, halos swirling with the promise of inner light. Monks spoke in hushed tones of Tummo, the secret fire of the spirit. Invading armies labeled these practices heresy, chiseled away the sacred faces, and scattered manuscripts to the wind. What remained was a pale shell of chanting and ritual, stripped of its transformative essence. Scribes who survived the carnage recopied texts, but fearing new waves of persecution, they excised every reference to yogic techniques and vision quests. Over centuries, a living tradition became a lifeless ceremony, and true seekers had to dig through layers of redaction to unearth a spark of original fire. Even in the Mediterranean, where Christianity rose on the ruins of pagan temples, an uneasy exchange took place. Some church fathers repurposed temple walls for basilicas, painting over serpentine motifs with frescoes of saints. In private, however, early Christian mystics like Gregory of Nyssa recalled tasting the same ecstatic union that Pythia had, murmured under Delphi's roof. Yet to speak of such experiences publicly risked accusations of paganism or heresy. The result was a centuries-long dance of concealment and appropriation, where the outer form of worship changed, but the hidden core of inner flight persisted, an ember waiting to ignite. Across time and culture, the same pattern repeats. A temple's threshold opens to a realm of hidden power, and authority either tries to control it by co-opting its symbols or extinguish it by demonizing its rites. Yet these gateways never vanish entirely. In medieval Persia, Sufi masters spoke of passing through gates on the path to union, each gate corresponding to a quality of the heart: humility, patience, love. Their dervishes danced in whirling circles, their arms outstretched like cosmic spokes, surrendering to a rhythm far older than any caliph's command. Their songs and stories preserved hints of vanished temples, encoded in poetry and metaphor. Why has this knowledge been so often buried, misunderstood, or lost? Because it poses an irresistible threat. If anyone can light the lamp of inner vision without investing in external authority, then crowns lose their luster, and thrones shudder at the weight of unveiled truth. Yet the persistence of these traditions, in fragments of text in secret orders, and in the quiet insistence of dreamers, reveals a deeper lesson. Thresholds of stone and wood, give way to thresholds of consciousness. The outer doors may be boarded up, but the chamber lives on inside the seeker who dares to call it forth. As you consider the silent frames of ruined temples in distant lands, remember that those thresholds are not confined to history. They stand in the gap between your everyday self and a larger, wilder self. Every hesitation before a choice, every moment you step beyond habit, echoes the pilgrim's foot on Delphi's stones. The devotee's breath in an Indus well, the Maya's sun-kissed summit. The hidden powers that once flowed through temple corridors still pulse in the heartbeat of anyone willing to cross the threshold. If only we have the courage to open the door. When rulers build empires of stone and steel, they think they have harnessed every force. Yet time and again, history shows that a king's greatest fear can be found not on the battlefield, but behind the carved doors of a temple. What terrifies a throne more than a rival army? The suggestion that its subjects can tap into a power higher than the crown itself. In the late 4th century CE, Emperor Constantine, celebrated as the first Christian ruler of Rome, faced a dilemma he never anticipated. He had declared tolerant policies toward his new faith, yet the old gods still spoke through sacred oracles. Their voices echoed in the Serapeum of Alexandria, where priests channeled answers that sometimes contradicted imperial edict. One such prophecy warned of a two-headed eagle rising to supplant the emperor's rule, a veiled reference to yet another contender. Constantine could tolerate many things, but a direct challenge to his divine mandate was intolerable. So he Christianized the Serapeum. One morning in 391 CE, citizens found the massive temple doors chained shut. Soldiers dismantled altars, hauled away statues, and poured rubble into its great hall. Priests who had once guided kings in matters of war and peace were beaten or exiled. The voices that once navigated life's deepest questions were silenced. In doing so, Constantine sent a message. The state's voice alone would decree truth. This conquest of voices reveals the first core concept. Temples embody a dual authority. On one hand, they are civic centers, places of gathering, tribute, and spectacle. On the other, they claim a direct channel to the transcendent, a pact between individual heart and cosmic order that no throne can fully own. A king may appoint priests, but he cannot dictate the divine spark within each seeker. When a temple's oracle proclaims judgment, it places itself above any human institution. That is why rulers quake. They sense the brittle line between allegiance to the crown and allegiance to the gods. To understand how this fear plays out, imagine a corporation where employees secretly consult an outsider for guidance on company strategy. Even if the CEO approves the outsider, the very act of deferring to someone beyond the corporate hierarchy undermines the CEO's control. Temples work the same way. Farmers, merchants, soldiers, rich and poor alike, entered in equal humility, seeking answers they could not get from a mortal ruler. Each answered question carried the weight of heaven, rendering any earthly edict provisional. Yet this battle between earthly and divine authority did not begin with Constantine. Centuries earlier, Persian kings built fire temples to enforce state religion and bind tribes together under Zoroastrian doctrine. They understood that a shared faith could weld a fractious realm into unity. But they also restricted access to the inner sanctum, the Aduran where the sacred flame burned, so only the ordained could approach. In doing so, they recognized that the eternal fire, if misused, could ignite more than hearts. It could spark rebellion. By controlling who saw the flame, they controlled who held hope and who held fear. Back in Alexandria, Constantine's edict left a void. Without the Serapeum's counsel, people felt unmoored. Some turned to underground gatherings, others fled to desert hermits claiming new visions. The emperor thought he had snuffed out dissent, but in truth he had only driven it into hidden alleys and caves, where it deepened like acid in silence. This outcome reveals a second concept. Suppression often concentrates power rather than extinguishing it. When an oracle goes silent in a public temple, its voice finds refuge in secret circles, growing more potent because it must be preserved at any cost. Emperor Constantine's actions also illuminate a third core idea. Divine walls invite forbidden questions. In a formal temple, rituals and hierarchies channel worship into acceptable shapes, but behind closed doors, questions that challenge the status quo take on a sacred glow. Is the emperor's tax fair? Will the kingdom endure plague or peace? Will death dissolve all bonds, or does the soul journey onward? A sovereign might decree that such inquiries are treasonous, but the impulse for truth seeps through cracks, like water eroding stone. Consider the story of the Eleusinian mysteries in Greece. For nearly 2 millennia, initiates kept silent about the rites honoring Demeter and Persephone. Those who left the temples were bound by oath to secrecy, yet the rites granted them a vision of life beyond death, of suffering transformed into joy. When Christian emperors, or out of fear of political unrest, finally outlawed those mysteries in the 5th century, they discovered that secrecy had made the knowledge more alluring, not less. People whispered of initiation's promise in hushed tones, spreading its fragments across the Mediterranean. You cannot legislate away the human yearning for deeper meaning. The same pattern recurred with Genghis Khan in the 13th century. Though he is often remembered as a conqueror of cities, he first sought to subdue the spiritual centers that bound those cities together. In the Khwarezmian Empire, Buddhist shrines and Sufi zawiyas held popular loyalty that rivaled local governors. Khan's solution was surgical. He ordered the destruction of key shrines and the public execution of respected sheikhs who refused to swear allegiance. The result was swift submission, yet it also cemented in the conquerors' hearts a respect for the power those shrines once wielded. Centuries later, Khans would patronize new temples, not to worship but to co-opt that emotional force for their own legitimacy. These stories converge on a single truth. Divine walls are more than stone. They are vessels of collective imagination. When that imagination runs up against a ruler's walls, sparks fly. Any king who ignores this dynamic risks a sudden charge on his rear guard, led not by swords but by whispered convictions. A temple's walls proclaim, "You too have rights, you too can stand before the divine." Such a proclamation is the ultimate counterweight to earthly power. As we trace these threads through Constantine's closed doors, we see that temple suppression reveals deeper fears. The fear of losing narrative control, the fear of unseen alliances, and the fear of a spark igniting within the human heart that no decree can douse. But perhaps the greatest irony is this. Every time a ruler silences an oracle or seals a sanctum, they prove the very potency they wish to deny. A king may tear down a temple, but in doing so he shows that he believes its walls held something more powerful than his own armies. The question lingers: what happens when we stand before the ruins of a Christianized temple, or the blackened base of a burned shrine? Do we see ash and broken columns, or do we sense the echo of questions that once shook empires? In that echo lies the real power of divine walls, and the reason why every king who dared to hush them trembled at the threshold. When Spanish conquistadors marched into Tenochtitlan in 1521, they did more than topple an empire. They obliterated centuries of ritual life in a single brutal sweep. Cortez's soldiers dragged priests from stone altars, smashed jade idols to powder, and set fire to the great temples atop the city's twin pyramids. Scrolls, codices painstakingly painted on amate bark, were heaped into bonfires alongside incense burners and ceremonial masks. This was not merely a campaign of religious zeal, but a calculated attempt to erase a civilization's memory. By extinguishing the Aztec rituals under the glare of Christian crosses, the conquistadors believed they could secure not only land, but souls. Yet in that very act of destruction, a paradox took shape. Myths grew stronger in their absence, and fragments of knowledge survived in secret enclaves, carried by priests who fled into the jungle or concealed codices in clay. Jars buried beneath family hearths. 300 years earlier, another bastion of learning and sacred rite lay on the plains of Bihar in India. Nalanda University was more than an academic institution. It was a sprawling temple complex, its courtyards echoing with the chants of monks and the turn of palm leaf manuscripts. When Muhammad Bakhtiar Khilji swept through in the early 12th century, he allegedly gathered 30 cartloads of these scrolls and hurled them into a blazing pyre that burned for months. A contemporary chronicler claimed that the fire was visible 100 miles away. Scholars mourned not only the loss of Buddhist teachings, but the very collapse of a system that had preserved knowledge, from Mahayana sutras to advanced treatises on mathematics and medicine, for nearly a millennium. Yet even as pillars cracked and scrolls turned to ash, the ideas they contained refused to vanish. Refugee monks carried surviving texts to Tibet, where scribes copied them with reverence in hidden monasteries. In Mesoamerica, codices smuggled by indigenous families resurfaced centuries later, informing modern archaeology and reviving Nahua traditions in Mexico today. The very attempt to ban these rituals etched their outlines deeper into the collective psyche, forging a lineage of secrecy that outlived empires. This pattern of erasure and rebirth reveals a deeper truth. Rituals are vessels of communal identity, and when those vessels shatter, the spirit they contain seeks another home. In the Aztec case, surviving elders wove fragments of human sacrifice iconography into Christian festivals, transforming the bloody offerings of Tlaloc into the earth blood of Corpus Christi processions. In India, the lost Nalanda libraries became the stuff of legend, the hidden archives of the world, whispered in courtly halls of Delhi long after Khilji's armies had departed. These myths, though arising from the very act of annihilation, became lifelines for people longing to reclaim a past, stripped from them by force. A common misconception holds that conquerors destroyed temples and libraries out of sheer ignorance. In reality, many invaders were well aware of the value these sites held. Cortés famously boarded a Spanish ship to fetch bronze cannons when he realized that no amount of steel swords could breach the Aztec temple walls. Likewise, Khilji's men scoured dusty nooks for manuscripts that could fill the Crusaders' coffers with both gold and prestige. Their actions were as much about cultural monopoly as about religious conviction. By banning the old rites, they replaced them with their own sacred scripts, the Latin Vulgate in one hemisphere, the Quran in the other, thus reshaping the moral and intellectual landscape to match the conqueror's worldview. Yet even as these rituals were branded heretical or pagan, they persisted in whispered form. In the shadowy canopies of Guatemala, Maya shamans secretly traced glyphs in the dirt, teaching their apprentices the lunar calendar math their ancestors had lost on paper. In the Himalayan passes, Tibetan lamas recited verses from Nalanda's vanished libraries by heart, their septuagenarian voices trembling with the weight of 1,000 pages. These clandestine practices became proof that knowledge, once sparked in the human mind, cannot be fully extinguished by fire or sword. There is a higher-order irony here. When authorities ban a ritual, they elevate its significance. Stone pillars may lie in ruin, but the stories of what once transpired within those walls acquire a mythic glow. Visitors to the ruins of Tenochtitlan report an almost palpable resonance, as if the earth itself remembers the drums of human sacrifice. Pilgrims to Bihar's empty monastic courtyards speak of a silent hum, a residual echo of chants that no longer rise to the sky. In both cases, absence becomes a form of presence. Destruction becomes a conduit for collective longing. Yet not all hidden currents flow toward revival. Some knowledge fades into untranslatable fragments, like a melody whose final note has been lost. We may never know the precise rituals performed at Nalanda's great stupa, or the full symbolism of the Aztec feathered serpent ceremony. In those gaps, Modern scholars sometimes project their own fantasies, romanticizing, exoticizing, or even dismissing these practices as primitive. Such myths of romantic ruin can be as misleading as the conqueror's propaganda. A temple destroyed is not a pure gem awaiting rediscovery. It is a wounded archive whose unreadable pages force us to confront the limits of historical reconstruction. To navigate this terrain, we must balance reverence with critical inquiry. Recognizing the sacred value these rituals held does not mean uncritically deifying them. We must ask, which aspects served communal well-being and which were instruments of social control? Human sacrifice may have unified Aztec society, but it also entrenched hierarchies and perpetuated violence. Buddhist debates in Nalanda's halls may have refined metaphysical thought, yet they sometimes excluded dissenting voices with rigid scholasticism. By examining these contradictions, we move beyond hagiography into a more nuanced understanding of why authorities feared and banned these rites. Ultimately, the story of burned scrolls and broken pillars is not merely a chronicle of loss, it is a testament to resilience. When a culture's most sacred spaces are leveled, people do not simply surrender. They adapt, conceal their ceremonies in new forms, and forge underground networks that keep the flame alive. The very act of banning a ritual reveals its potency, because authorities waste no effort on what they consider inconsequential. A destroyed temple is proof of a living power that demands control, and when that power refuses to die, it reminds us that the human spirit harbors depths no conqueror can fully conquer. In our age of digitized memory and global exchange, we stand at a new crossroads. Will we allow the scrolls of ancient civilizations to gather digital dust, or will we ensure they remain living dialogues? The ruins of Tenochtitlan and Nalanda beckon us not as mausoleums, but as invitations to engage, carefully, critically, and creatively, with the rituals that once bound communities together. For in their ashes lies the blueprint for regeneration, a reminder that knowledge, like the phoenix, can rise again if we dare to kindle its embers. Have you ever noticed how when life's storms batter every wall around you, the only refuge that truly holds is the one built inside? Rumi taught that the wound is the place where light enters you, and in those cracks of pain and uncertainty lies the raw material for an inner temple far more enduring than any marble shrine. While ancient temples consecrated space in stone, today the soul's sanctuary must be carved in memory, ritual, and intention, because no physical walls can withstand the churn of modern existence. Imagine grief as a chisel striking the surface of your being. At first the blows feel brutal, loss, disappointment, betrayal, but each strike opens a fissure. Into that fissure, if we allow it, pours a quiet radiance, insight into our own resilience, compassion for others, a deeper sense of what truly matters. This is the seat of the inner sanctuary, where we learn to shelter not from the world's winds, but within the calm eye of awareness. In the same way that pilgrims long ago crossed temple thresholds to commune with the divine, we cross a private threshold each time we pause, breathe, and turn inward. Yet few of us are taught how to build or defend that inner space. Instead, we live in a new kind of temple, one made of screens and algorithms. Social media platforms present themselves as open courts, where we gather to share ideas and beliefs, but in practice, they often become echo chambers, their gates selectively opened or shut by invisible moderators and faceless codes. Speak a forbidden thought and your voice is silenced, shadow banned, demonetized, or drowned in a flood of curated likes that reward conformity over curiosity. In this digital temple, censorship is celebrated as community safety, and dissent is labeled toxicity. We forget that the purpose of a sanctuary is not to block out shadow, but to hold space for every shade of experience, even the disquieting ones. The irony is that when platforms claim to shield us from harmful content, they often deprive us of the very friction that tempers our growth. Without challenge, our beliefs calcify. We mistake the comfort of agreement for the safety of understanding. A true sanctuary, by contrast, welcomes the dissonance that polishes insight. It invites us to sit with discomfort until we find the hidden ember beneath the ashes, a flash of compassion for an adversary, a new angle on a long-held assumption, a moment of stillness that reframes our priorities. This is knowledge in action, not the rote memorization of doctrines, but the living wisdom born of direct experience. So how do we avoid the trap of digital dogma and rediscover our inner thresholds? First, we must recognize that every habit can become a gate, opening us to illumination or barring us from growth. Scrolling through an endless feed may feel like connection, but it often erodes attention and deepens distraction. Instead, set aside a daily ritual, a few minutes of silent sitting, a moment to write down the questions pressing at your heart. These habits are the modern equivalent of incense and candlelight, signaling to your mind that you are entering sacred ground. Next, face the misconception that spirituality requires elaborate practice or exotic rites. Many seekers assume that without monastic robes or temple consecration, their inner work lacks legitimacy. But the heart's altar needs nothing more than your full presence. A simple act, touching your forehead, placing a hand on your chest, whispering a word that captures your intention, can awaken a sense of sanctuary. Over time, these micro-rituals accumulate, constructing a fortress of attention and compassion that no algorithm can breach. Finally, understand that the inner sanctuary is not a refuge from action, but its source. When we cultivate a calm center, we become more effective agents in the world. Decisions arise not from reflex or fear, but from insight. Conversations shift from debate to dialogue, because we no longer conflate disagreement with danger. In this way, the sanctuary ripples outward. Relationships heal, communities transform, and the larger temples of society, schools, workplaces, civic spaces, gain the benefit of souls willing to bear light into their darkest corners. The path is neither linear nor easy. You will stumble at the threshold, distracted by a siren notification or rattled by a fresh disappointment. You may question whether the effort is worth it. After all, the world seems to grow more chaotic by the hour. But remember Rumi's wisdom. It is precisely through our wounds that light enters. Each challenge to the inner wall invites us to reinforce it, not with brick and mortar, but with awareness and kindness. In the silence between breaths, ask yourself, what am I sheltering from and what am I sheltering for? What hurt am I willing to hold so that I might glimpse the hidden ember inside? These questions are the keys to your private sanctuary. No authority can ban them. No algorithm can erase them. They are the sacred inheritance of every person who ever paused long enough to discover that the soul deserves its own sanctuary, and that within its quiet chambers lies the power to transform not only ourselves but the world we share. Carl Jung once climbed the spiral staircase of his beloved Bollingen Tower, lit a single beeswax candle in the small chapel at its summit, and paused to let the glow wash over the rough-hewn stones. That solitary flame flickering in a tower built by his own hands became for Jung a nightly affirmation. The soul is its own sanctuary, and tending its fire is a sacred duty no decree can forbid. His ritual teaches us that even when the grandest temples lie in ruins, a simple candle can rekindle a living connection to the hidden powers within. We have traveled through history's broken pillars and banned rites to discover that temples, whether of marble or of pixels, are more than buildings. They are thresholds where the human spirit glimpses something vast and enduring, a space where fear gives way to awe. When authorities razed the Serapeum or burned the scrolls of Nalanda, they tried to contain what they could not control. Yet every act of suppression only highlighted what rulers most feared, that each person deep within can forge a direct link to the divine, the mysterious and the true. Today, our towers may take the form of morning routines, meditation cushions, or the cursor blinking on an empty page. Our candles might be words we write with intention, breaths we draw with full awareness, or moments we steal from distraction to FaceTime our own still, small voice. These modern altars invite us to claim the same sovereignty Jung found in Bollingen's stone walls. No bureaucrat can bar us from our own hearts. No algorithm can snuff out our inner flame unless we allow it. Yet we often forget this power. We scurry through life buffeted by opinions, demands, and noise. We pour offerings into social media temples, hoping for likes, shares, and the hollow validation of digital applause. But those external embers burn low. They feed the ego, not the soul. Jung understood that true illumination comes not from crowds, but from solitude. Lighting a candle in a secluded tower, then carrying its glow into community, research, and therapy sessions. Each flicker was a reminder that the deepest questions, who am I? What do I love? What does my pain teach me? Deserve their own sacred space. So how do we rekindle that forbidden flame today? First, recognize that rites need not be elaborate. Jung's candle was humble, a single flame against rough stone. Your ritual might be as simple as choosing an object that symbolizes your intention. A favorite book, a smooth pebble, a small bowl of water, and setting it aside at the start of each day. As you touch it, pause for 3 deep breaths and whisper a question you carry in your heart. This small ceremony signals to your mind, I am crossing into my inner temple now. Second, treat your attention as the high priest of your inner sanctum. Notice where you scatter it each day. Does it drift toward endless scrolling, reactive comments, or anxious planning? Or does it rest on moments of genuine curiosity, compassion, and wonder? By gently guiding your focus back to what matters, learning, loving, healing, you build invisible walls that guard against distraction and doubt. Attention is the mortar of your inner temple. Without it, the stones of insight crumble. Third, embrace the tension between light and shadow. Jung insisted that by igniting the shadow within, the wounded hidden parts of ourselves, we feed the soul's fire. When you journal honestly about your fears, mistakes, and longings, you feed that flame with raw material. The gouges of pain become the channels where light enters, exactly as Rumi taught. In those passages of vulnerability, the inner temple deepens and expands, accommodating not just joy but the transformative power of suffering. As the candle's glow spreads in Jung's tower, it warmed not only the chapel, but the very core of his work. He returned to his patients, and his research invigorated, carrying the silent assurance that the psyche's mysteries are invitations, not threats. You too can carry your inner light into the world, into relationships, creative projects, even moments of quiet service. Let the flame guide your words and deeds, so that your everyday life becomes a procession of small rituals consecrated by intention. There will be moments when external forces demand conformity, when the world's clamor threatens to douse your flame. In those times, return to your candle. Light it again in your mind or in your space, and remind yourself of the vows you made to your soul. No decree can erase a flame that lives in memory. No criticism can snuff out the fire you feed with each act of presence. Carl Jung understood that a candle in a crumbling tower can outshine entire empires' palaces. Your inner temple, once kindled, radiates outward in unexpected ways, sparking insight in a friend, clarity in a debate, compassion in a moment of conflict. It is the invisible architecture of a life lived from the center, not the edge, from depth, not distraction. The forbidden flame is never truly forbidden. It awaits your invitation, your willingness to step past habitual walls and into the quiet chamber of your own becoming. What walls will you rebuild? What flames will you dare to light? Let us kindle this conversation together. Share your thoughts, your rituals, and the questions you carry. The inner temple is vast, and its gates stand open for all who seek.